Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And I'm going to review, I believe, all in all, or review, excuse me, but I am going to post overall a couple of videos, I believe, today. Or maybe I'll post it a little bit later on, I'm not sure, but more than likely today, I'm probably going to post two videos. I'm probably going to post this one. And then I'm more than likely also going to do a fight prediction on the very big fight that is happening this weekend, or at least a decently big fight, the good comeback fight of Mr. Soul Canelo Alvarez, of course, because he is facing Gennady Triple G Golovkin in that of the trilogy. And of course, Gennady Golovkin, he is now older than what he once was. I don't believe that he is the same fighter, but it could be a very interesting match. And the reason why that is because kind of like when we take a look at Deontay Wilder versus Robert Elenius, I don't believe that Robert Elenius is necessarily an A-grade fighter, but when we take a look at it, including all of the coexisting factors, Deontay Wilder is coming off of a loss, a very bad loss to Mr. Tyson Fury. Him and Robert Elenius used to be sparring partners, and on top of that, Robert Elenius has a little bit of momentum, so it could be very interesting. Now, Gennady Golovkin, when he is at his best, debatably even now, you could still debate him as an A-grade fighter. When Gennady Golovkin was at his best, those few years back, or whenever those two matches with him and Canelo took place, Gennady certainly was not only an A-grade fighter, he was one of the best fighters on the planet, no doubt about it. So Canelo, in my view, especially when he was able to beat Gennady Triple G Golovkin in that rematch, he gained a lot of my respect when it came down to it. And Mr. Gennady Golovkin, even though I think that he is a little bit older and slowed down a couple of paces, he still could give Canelo Alvarez a little bit of problems. Who knows? Because Canelo, of course, is coming off of a loss where, in my opinion, he lost 8 rounds to 4 against Mr. Dimitri Bivol. And on top of that, Gennady Golovkin does somewhat know what Canelo Alvarez can bring to the table. So this could be a very interesting fight. I don't think that Gennady is going to win the fight, but he could make it a little bit interesting, maybe, depending on the round. So it is going to be very particularly interesting. But anyways, Mr. DontesBoxingNation, who of course I tend to like to review here and there, mainly because of his absolutely bogus points when it comes down to it. Well, Mr. DontesBoxingNation is going to jump on the bandwagon of what Mr. Max Golovkin, who I believe is the older brother of Gennady Golovkin, he is going to jump overall on basically what Max Golovkin said about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, and basically agree that with what Mr. Max Golovkin said. And what Max Golovkin said, of course, is that he believes that Canelo Alvarez is only an average Mexican fighter. Do I think that they all necessarily believe that Canelo Alvarez is truly an average Mexican fighter? No, I don't think that they think that at all. Because if they truly thought that, not only would they still be trying to go after this fight, well, one could argue overall, even if they were thinking that well, Canelo on these scorecards, whether you think he won or not, he did get the win on paper, so maybe Golovkin just wants his revenge. But if Golovkin truly thought that Canelo Alvarez was just an average fighter, he would have not fought Canelo Alvarez the way that he did in the rematch. Because Golovkin mainly is a pressure fighter. Not saying that he can't fight a little bit on the back foot, but Canelo Alvarez made him so uncomfortable in some of those rounds because Gennady was not able to use his regular pace in that fight. And I was actually rooting for Gennady Golovkin to win that fight back then. That was when I did not like Canelo Alvarez. I was not as logical and objective back then as what I am now, at least from my perspective. In fact, I really hated Canelo Alvarez. And the reason why that was because I thought that in the first Gennady Golovkin fight, I thought that it was a very bad decision. I thought that Canelo Alvarez clearly should have lost. And I still would debate that, in my view, that Canelo still should have lost that fight. But it was a little bit more competitive looking back on it now than probably what I once originally thought. And when we talk about the Araceli Lara fight, I also thought that that was one that Canelo Alvarez kind of escaped with. But looking back on that fight now, I also can see why Canelo Alvarez probably got the decision. You can maybe argue that Lara could have threw a little bit more, and that maybe Canelo, that he was able to get, most of the rounds, at least debatably. But when Canelo Alvarez was able to beat Gennady Golovkin in the rematch, overall, Canelo did gain a certain amount of my respect. And the reason why that was because I believe that not only did he improve as a boxer, but Canelo Alvarez, all in all, he really showed that he had a great amount of grit and that he had a great amount of heart and high boxing IQ, because you cannot just be an average fighter in my opinion, to beat someone like a Gennady Triple G Golovkin. So it just is what it is. But anyways, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, he's going to talk about it. I'm going to tune in.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Gennady Golovkin's brother, Max Golovkin, he came out and he said, I personally consider Canelo to be just an average boxer. He's just some average Mexican boxer that has been promoted to the top. And guys, this is exactly what Canelo Alvarez is. And this is the reason why whenever I hear...
No, Canelo Alvarez is not just some average Mexican boxer. It just amazes me overall how far Dante's Boxing Nation will go to degrade certain fighters that he clearly sees as a threat to the #1 pound-for-pound position. You know, or fighters that he clearly overall does not want to try and promote. Like, come on, dude. and listen, I get it on and off. Maybe you want to say that, you know, Canelo Alvarez, that, you know, maybe there's certain fights that he hasn't taken yet. In my view, Canelo Alvarez has never really truly been ducking clear fights out there anyway. But even if you wanted to state that there's certain fights that you want to see with Canelo, that's cool. But to call Canelo Alvarez an average fighter, I mean, that's just stupidity. It just is what it is. In my view, that would be like calling overall, I mean, I don't want to compare him necessarily to Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Manny Pacquiao quite as of yet. But Canelo Alvarez, in my view, later on, could potentially be on that level. He's about a level or two below them. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he's an all-time great fighter. He's not just a great fighter. He is an all-time great fighter. Let me say that again. Canelo is not just a great fighter. He is an all-time great fighter. Okay? You cannot have Danny Jacobs and Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Gennady Golovkin and Erislandy Lara and Austin Trout, Miguel Cotto. You can't have all these guys on your resume, you know, and have a clear win over most of them and just be an average Mexican boxer. That's not how boxing works. An average boxer to me, and we have to be very careful, just like we have to be very careful with using the term great. An average boxer, in my opinion, would be someone like a Breedis Prescott, or would be someone overall maybe like, you know, someone around a C grade level, like a Luis Collazo. And even them, you may not want to call them average, you know. But if we're talking about average champions or fighters all in all that ended up getting a belt, but, you know they're not A grade, let's say that was your definition of average. Those would be champions like a David Lemieux, or those would be champions maybe like a Jose Pedraza, or someone like that. Those are fighters all in all that are average level fighters, or someone like an Adrian Broner, you know, someone like that. Those are average level fighters. Canelo Alvarez, even if you wanted to debate that he lost to Lara, in your view, and lost to Golovkin, look at how many great fighters that he beat. It is what it is. And in my view, you could also argue that he beat Lara and that he deserved that fight, and he got it. On paper, he got that win. And in the rematch against Golovkin, he also got the win. So calling Canelo Alvarez an average fighter is just asinine. But we all know that, Dante, that he's going to try to push that in any sort of way possible. Anyway.
Some Mexicans saying that Canelo Alvarez is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. If you believe that, then that's not saying a whole lot about Mexican boxers. Max Golovkin was spot on when he said that Canelo has been promoted to the top, because old media knew that Canelo Alvarez...
And this is a big part of the reason why I like to review certain videos like this, because there's a certain amount of people that might go into these videos, and once again, I always have certain people ask me, why do you review their videos? Why are you giving them attention? Why are you doing this? Listen, I understand all in all that sometimes it is not necessary to give them attention, and sometimes even by reviewing it, that sometimes it may give them more followers, but certain videos overall do need to be talked about. Certain things do need to be talked about, and this is something, in my view, that does need to be talked about, because you actually have a certain amount of people that are actually dumb enough to believe that, oh, Canelo, he's only an average fighter, and he was only promoted because he has the complexion for the protection. Listen, does Canelo have a little bit of the complexion that could be for the protection? Listen, man, you can argue that when it comes down to it, but we have to know the difference between someone that is 100% all hype and someone that is actually the real deal. Tommy Morrison, for those of you that remember him, that was a fighter that was very, very carefully matched up. And once he finally started facing real deal champions, he started losing almost every big fight in his career. That was an example of a fighter. For those of you that remember Sammy Vasquez Jr., that one Marine, I believe, he was winning fights until he faced Felix Diaz, Jr., I believe, that one fighter that Terrence Bud Crawford ended up knocking out, and then he fought Luis Collazo and got knocked out by him. That was someone who was pretty much all hype. Canelo Alvarez is not all hype, because fighters that end up being all hype, they get exposed sooner or later, no matter what the fight. They end up receiving an ass whooping, overall more times overall than what they usually win in their bigger fights. Now, of course, Canelo, he ended up losing to Mr. Floyd Mayweather Jr. several years ago, and he just recently lost to Dimitri Bivol. But let's take a look overall at those standards. So unless you were a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter when it came down to it, or overall that unless, you're a person that not only was decently skilled but bigger than him, usually Canelo Alvarez is not going to lose those fights. And not only is he not going to lose those fights, he's usually going to be very decently dominant in them. Okay? So when we really take a look at the fighters that he's really had problems with, Gennady Golovkin, Arasani Lara, Dimitri Bivol, and Floyd Mayweather Jr., those have been the toughest fights in his career. Those are very high standards. You're talking about Canelo Alvarez facing Floyd when he was 23 years old, and Floyd was the clear #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Now, of course, some may say, well, other people were able to defeat the #1 pound-for-pound fighter when they were 23. Yes, but if you're one of these guys that claim that Floyd is the best ever, and, I would debate that he could be on that level, then we have to take a look at that overall and say, okay, well, Canelo Alvarez, maybe we can give him at least a little bit of a break. Don't get me wrong, he still clearly lost the fight. But at the end of the day, let's cut him a little bit of slack, because Canelo Alvarez was 23 years old, and he had never even stepped into the ring with a fighter that was anywhere near on Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s caliber. Let's take a look at his next tough fight, Arasani Lara. That was when Canelo, I believe, was about 24 years old, and Arasani Lara, of course, a part of the Cuban boxing school, and Canelo Alvarez debatably got that fight on the cards. All right, Lara overall was an extraordinarily gifted fighter. And then when you talk about the other fights, Gennady Triple G Golovkin, he was a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, not even top 5. On almost every single list, he was looked at as top 3. All right, and then you take a look at his next fight, Dimitri Bivol. Canelo Alvarez is not a natural light heavyweight. In terms of stature, he's probably not even a natural 168-pounder. And Dimitri Bivol, not only one of the best amateur boxers that we've seen within the past several years, but also overall one of the best professional boxers, undefeated, and had a decent size advantage over him. So Canelo's career has been going pretty well so far. Anyway. Because what people will try to tell you is that, oh, Canelo, this is what Dante's point always is, and I assure you that he's going to mention it sooner or later. Well, we can't really even count the Arasani Lara or Gennady Golovkin fights because those were so controversial. Well, then does that mean that we can't count the wins that Andre Ward got over Sergey Kovalev because so many of those guys found it as controversial? Do you know how many people thought that the Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev fight was controversial? Does that mean that instead of the draw that Jermell Charlo got against Brian Castano, that we don't count that as a draw anymore, that we have to count that as a loss? Because if we're really being real, Jermell Charlo really should have lost that fight. Or Jermall Charlo versus Matt Korobov, when Jermall Charlo got a bit lucky, to be honest, that he got that decision in the first place, or Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez. Like, we just can't do that. Now, we do have to take a look at a difference overall between a close fight that could go either way and a complete robbery. Like when Timothy Bradley ended up getting the decision over Manny Pacquiao, that was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen in my life. When Arasani Lara ended up losing against Paul Williams, that was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen in my life. But when we talk about Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin in the rematch, or when we talk about Canelo versus Lara, or Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev, or when we talk about overall, certain other fights, Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez, or Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler. No, those fights are not robberies. You have a legitimate argument in any of the fights that I just mentioned, overall besides maybe Leonard versus Hagler, that fight could have truly went either way. So it is what it is.
Average Mexican boxer, he was just the guy that they wanted to be at the top of the sport, regardless if he deserved to be there or not.
Well, I hate to tell you this, Mr. Dantes Boxing Nation. Not only has Canelo Alvarez been at the top of the sport, even though he lost his last fight, he still is at the top of the sport. And that's very clear by his numbers and by his resume. This is why you cannot trust a certain amount of what this dude says, because he really overall does not know the difference, or maybe he does know the difference overall. When it comes down to it, I can't really tell which one it completely is. But Dante is not as stupid as what he lets on. He knows overall that Canelo Alvarez is a very decent fighter. That's why he always bitch, moans, and complains about Jamal Charlo apparently not getting the fight. But then when that fight was about to happen this year, or when Canelo said that he wanted to fight him, what did Dante have to say? Oh, well, we don't want to see the fight anymore because Jamal Charlo's not the same fighter. Bullshit. You've been calling for that fight for the past several years because allegedly Canelo Alvarez has been ducking him. Now all of a sudden the fight's about to happen, then you're scared. So just shut up. Anyway.
See, they wanted to replace Floyd Mayweather and have a non-black version of Floyd Mayweather. And there's no doubt about it, Canelo Alvarez.
Once again, this is why you cannot trust Dante's Boxing Nation. I get certain people that come on my channel or come in my comment section, and they're like, what are you talking about? That's offensive what you just said, because you just said that, Canelo Alvarez is a threat to, the #1 pound for pound spot over black fighters. Are you saying that, black fighters are not elite? That's not what I said at all. What all I said is that Dante's Boxing Nation, and I've said this repeatedly, Dante's Boxing Nation does not want someone like a Canelo Alvarez, or someone like a Lomachenko, or someone like a Tyson Fury, or someone like an Alexander Usyk, even potentially at the #1 pound for pound spot. And every single time one of those guys are put there, all he's going to do is use the, oh my God, they're just hyped up because they have the complexion for the protection card. So that's why this dude cannot be trusted.
He fit the bill. They feel with him being Mexican.
Because even with solid results and a solid resume, he's not willing to give them their due. Okay? So it just is what it is. Once again, we can take a look at other sports. If we were to take a look at the NFL, with the quarterback position being primarily dominated over the past, I don't know how many years, 99% of the time by Caucasians, yes, we can say that, Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson or Lamar Jackson or some of these other guys, specifically Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes especially, because those are the elite quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson, I'm not so sure about. We can sit here and say that, oh, well, they're just a little bit more hyped up because they're just black quarterbacks. Well, yes, at the end of the day, there might be a little bit of that. Whenever, you have a demographic that is mainly dominant, and then all of a sudden a different, version or a different demographic is popping up out of the woodwork, like Tiger Woods overall in golf, when it comes down to it, or Serena Williams in tennis, or when it comes to boxing, Lomachenko or Canelo. Yes, they're always going to get a little bit more promotion, but then it's up to us, the observers to, gauge if we're intelligent enough to gauge, okay, you know what, is this person really more bark than they are bite, or do they actually have results? And Dante, I'm not sure overall if it's just because he tries to push his bullshit narrative and get money and views from talking about Canelo and being so overall, harsh, or what the hell is the word, controversial about the topic, or overall if he truly believes it. I think that it might be a little bit of both.
And having this unique Mexican appearance of being a light-skinned redhead Mexican, with the built-in Mexican fan base that are going to love Canelo Alvarez more just because he is light-skinned with red hair. I mean, Canelo Alvarez.
Well, I would agree with you there, Mr. Dante. Canelo Alvarez not only has a certain amount of the Mexicans behind him, he also has a certain amount of the Caucasians. Because if we are going to be real about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, his features, more than likely they are primarily Caucasoid. Just is what it is. You can be from Mexico and have Caucasoid features. There are certain ones down there because there may be a little bit of a German influence, or certain people that have been from European countries, or, Mexico overall is very, very mixed, and Canelo, you can tell that, even though, yes, he does have some, Latino features, that he is primarily Caucasoid. It just is what it is.
He's like the Mexican version of Ice-T or Will Smith. But the difference is when it comes to black people, it doesn't matter if you're dark-skinned or
I'm not sure if Will Smith is that mixed, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
High yellow. From Wesley Snipes to Huey Newton, black is black. Just in case you don't know who Huey Newton is, he was the founder of the Black Panthers. So anyway, when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, Mexican fans in particular, they look at him as so uncommon, so unique, that they put him on even a higher pedestal than they would usually put the average Mexican fighter that they would look up to, just because of his rare appearance. And this is the...
Well, I understand what you're saying there, Dante, but then we have to get into the facts of the matter. And then that means that we have to take a look at Canelo Alvarez's resume. Does he actually have the resume to stack up with these other Mexican fighters? Yes, he does. And a lot of people are not going to like it. Canelo Alvarez is debatably the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Just in terms of resume and skill set and what he's able to do, yes, he's debatably up there. Now, the only one that I would probably say has a very, very great argument or still could be there is Chavez Sr., Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. Some may also say Salvador Sanchez. I didn't watch much of Salvador. He was way before my time, and so was Julio, to be fair. But when it comes down to it, Salvador Sanchez, unfortunately, with the accomplishments, I just don't think that he can be up there. It just is what it is. But if we take a look at Chavez Sr., let's just say that you don't even want to compare him to Chavez Sr. for a minute. If we're comparing him to Marco Antonio Barrera or Eric Morales or Juan Manuel Marquez, can you say with 100% confidence that those fighters are actually greater and better than what a Canelo Alvarez has been? I'm not sure if you can debate that. Because when we take a look at Marco Antonio Barrera, he has several losses in his career, even against certain fighters that you would not even hear about today, like a Junior Jones. That's not even counting the one loss to Eric Morales and the couple to Manny Pacquiao, where he didn't even make the fights anywhere near competitive. If you talk about Eric Morales, he was able to get one win over Marco Antonio Barrera. He also was able to get, I believe, victory over Manny Pacquiao. But he lost the majority of those fights. He also has 2 knockout losses to Manny Pacquiao. And he also has 2 losses overall, I believe, to Mr. Marco Antonio Barrera. So can we really say that Eric Morales is greater than Canelo Alvarez? No, we can't. Now, what about Juan Manuel Marquez? Some people would debate it, but I'm not so sure about that. Because Marquez also has losses to the best fighters of his day. You see, Canelo can actually be debated as the best fighter of his day, or at least overall, usually within his natural weight divisions. That's the difference between Canelo and an Eric Morales and a Marco Antonio Barrera and a Juan Manuel Marquez. None of them can ever claim that they were even the second best fighter within overall, usually their weight divisions. Or, well, I won't say that, because Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales, they were usually a bit lighter, like I believe around 135. But when we talk about, going up a little bit, Marquez was never on the same level as a Floyd Mayweather Jr. He was never on the same level as a Manny Pacquiao. He was never on those same levels. And people can bitch, moan, and complain about Marquez allegedly getting robbed over Manny Pacquiao. He didn't get robbed. I watched those fights recently. He did not get robbed at all. He lost both of those fights. All right, the only fight that Marquez clearly won was the fight that he deserved to win because he won by knockout. Okay? So it is what it is. So no, those fighters are not on the same level as Canelo. And some people might bring up, well, what about overall, Oscar De La Hoya? Oscar's a great fighter. He also lost the majority of the big fights in his career. And not against fighters that were always bigger than him, against fighters that either would possibly even be a bit smaller than him or his own same size. One thing I know about Canelo, unless you're a little bit bigger than him or an extraordinary talent, like a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, you're not usually going to win against him. And on paper, he only has 2 losses. One of those being the clear #1 pound-for-pound fighter of the time, and probably the greatest fighter of the past, some would even debate 50-plus years in Floyd Mayweather Jr., and a loss to Mr. Dimitri Bivol overall when it comes down to it, who, of course, in my view, was one of the top 20 pound-for-pound fighters, and on top of that, he was an all-around very good to great boxer. And he's bigger than Canelo, so it just is what it is. So let's just stop the bullshit.
Exact reason why trainer Robert Garcia would say, why should the Mexicans have to beat up each other? Let them fight against the blacks and the whites. We shouldn't be fighting against each other. But then at the same time, he says Gilberto Ramirez and David Benavidez, they should fight each other. Even though David Benavidez is...
Well, that's of course in reference to Canelo Alvarez's most recent comment to where he said that he did not want to face Mexican fighters. I think the only fighter that he was talking about is Mr. Gilberto Soto Ramirez. But once again, if he does use that excuse of Mr. David Benavidez, that is not going to fly. He is going to have to face him. Otherwise, the gas is going to be lit up under his feet or under his ass. So he is going to have to face him eventually. Do I believe that Canelo was necessarily ducking David Benavidez? No, because Canelo has really showed me in the past that he's been usually willing to fight every challenge out there. We all know Dante has a very personal issue with Canelo. He's had a personal issue with him for the past several years, just like he had with Tyson Fury and Lomachenko and Golovkin. Is nothing new. But Canelo is going to have to face at least David Benavidez.
Canelo Alvarez is mandatory. You see, the reason why Robert Garcia would say something like that.
However, I believe all what Canelo Alvarez was really saying is that he really wanted to give the opportunity to become, for certain Mexican fighters like Azerto Ramirez, to become a champion and for them to get their own shine. I think that's all he was basically saying, but, you know, I could be wrong. We'll see what happens. And once again, if he does use that excuse with David Benavidez, that isn't going to fly. Because David Benavidez is in your own same weight division. You're supposed to be the king of 168 pounds. You know, you cannot avoid that fight forever if that is your plan. But Canelo, you know, already has shown, I believe, a little bit of interest in that fight. He just may have other things on his mind right now. But we'll see what happens.
Completely contradict himself is because he feels that Canelo Alvarez cannot be sacrificed, but other Mexicans can. Robert Garcia is saying we may never see another Mexican that looks like Canelo Alvarez that is on this level. Listen, there's no doubt about it. Canelo Alvarez is a good fighter. He's a Hall of Famer. But realistically, the bar...
I thought you just said that he was an average fighter. What happened?
...is not set that high to become a Hall of Famer.
Well, I would agree, Dante, but let's stop bullshitting. Canelo is not just a good fighter. He is a great fighter. He's not only a great fighter, he's an all-time great fighter. You cannot beat the fighters that he has beat in the way that he has beaten them and just be a good fighter. A good fighter is Adrian Broner. A good fighter, all in all, is someone overall like, I don't know, if I were going to compare it to someone else, you know, maybe, who the hell else is on the Adrian Broner level? I don't know, maybe like a Jose Pedraza. A good fighter, all in all, is someone like, even if you want to bring out Sean Porter, and I would say that he's a little bit better than good. Canelo is great. He's not just great, he's all-time great. And that's why you can't trust what Dante says, because he has a very big issue with giving credit where credit is due, mainly based on his pro-racial agenda and his over-emotional issues. Anyway.
I mean, remember, Sylvester...
And if I see all in all that you repeatedly overall have an issue with that, guess what that means? You can't be allowed to go an objective commentator. Okay? It just is what it is.
Stallone is also in the Hall of Fame just for his character as Rocky Balboa. I mean, just think about...
That's great, Dante, but let's stop bullshitting. And that's the second time that you brought up that point. And you know what? Guess who else? Guess who else he brought up that point with? Mr. Tyson Fury. Once again, man, I keep bringing up this point. He only brings this point up, or he's only trying to degrade certain fighters. Do you guys see a pattern here? I get some of these guys on my channel and all that say, oh, well, all Dante is trying to say is this and this and that. No, Dante is up to that bullshit. Dante knows exactly what he's doing. I know exactly what he's doing. Stop denying it. We all know, all of us who are intelligent enough, what the fuck is going on here. All right? When he does it with Tyson Fury, Canelo Alvarez, all these other fighters, we all know what the hell's going on. All right? Just like how ESPN may do it with certain, you know, repeated black fighters. Guess what Dante does? Anyway.
For a second. Rocky Balboa, Sylvester Stallone, he's on the same list of boxers that Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather, and Roy Jones Jr. are on. So my point is, while Canelo Alvarez is definitely a good fighter, he is definitely an average Mexican boxer. And here's how you know this.
How can you be a good fighter but an average Mexican boxer? What the hell are you even talking about? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Because whenever people that support Canelo Alvarez are talking about him, what do they always say about him? His entire career, since he's reached stardom in the sport, what do they always say about Canelo Alvarez? He can fight whoever he wants. He doesn't have to fight this guy, that guy. He can fight whoever he wants.
Right, the same shit that you were saying with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and the same shit that you still to this day talk about with Gervonta Tank Davis and Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford. So let's stop bullshitting. Listen, Dante, I don't mind your point, but keep the same energy everywhere else.
Translation, he's a limited fighter. He has to be matched carefully. That is exactly what it means.
How do you have to be matched carefully? And you fought Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, you know, Billy Joe Saunders, Araceli Lara, Austin Trout, Gennady Golovkin, Miguel Cotto, and won every single one of these fights. Danny Jacobs. Like, just shut the fuck up. This dude is so obnoxious to listen to the majority of the time. It's just so stupid. And if he truly even believes in what he's saying. Because there's a very decent possibility that he does not even believe in a lot of the shit that he says. But anyway.
Because by way of...
Remember, Caleb Plant and Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders on a lot of their lists once upon a time were dangerous fighters. But as soon as Canelo fought them, apparently they're just weak European white boys. Anyway.
Contrast. We never hear anyone, especially old media, say some black boxer, he has the right to fight whoever he wants. When Floyd...
Right, well, that's a decent point, Dante, but we hear you state that. We hear you try to overall bring up and say that Gervonta Tank Davis, that he's facing A-grade competition, when really he's fought nothing but 5 bums in a row. So, let's be real, okay?
Whether it was close to 40 years.
Because when Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis was fighting that one, overall can't even box bum, Mr. Rolando Romero, you were overall saying, oh, well, this is a great fight, so just stop bullshitting.
Old media was still pushing him to move up to middleweight and fight Gennady Golovkin. But you'll notice, it's not just with Canelo Alvarez, but any fighter that has the complexion for the protection. And when I say the complexion...
There he goes again. Once again, that shows you the main objective of Dante every single video is to talk about the complexion for the protection. And listen, to a degree, it does need to be talked about because there can be issues with it. But that's his theme basically every single video. So basically what that means is that, and listen, I get it to a degree. Because when you see certain standards that are unfair, after a while you are going to question them. Listen, I get it. But you have to know the difference between someone that is mainly ranked the way they are because of complexion. And maybe, or maybe it's a little bit of both. And on top of that, the person has great results. Canelo, yes, there's going to be a little bit of a push there because he not only can identify with the Latinos, but also the Caucasians, or at least overall a certain amount of those fans, they're going to be able to both identify with him. But Canelo also is a great boxer. I mean, that's like if someone were to look at Tiger Woods and say, oh, well, Tiger, yeah, he's decent, but, the only reason why he's so hyped up is because he's black and mainly a white man's sport. No, Tiger also won a certain amount of majors. So we got to be fair.
And it doesn't mean just being white. It just basically means not being black. Old media uses the same code words when they're talking about other...
And that's another thing that Dante just told you. He's telling you that that's what his main objective is. So every time there is a non-black fighter ranked into the top 10 pound-per-pound list, he's always going to be skeptical. And listen, I get it. It's okay to be skeptical. What's not okay, in my opinion, is to put these bullshit narratives out there. Overall, basically always trying to tear down certain fighters' resumes that you don't like because you want to put certain fighters above them on the pound-per-pound list. And that's exactly what Dante does.
Fighters on the hope list. When Teofimo Lopez, when he beat Vasyl Lomachenko before he lost to Kambosos, Max Kellerman and ESPN, they said the same thing about Teofimo Lopez. You can fight whoever you want. Max Kellerman, he said to Teofimo Lopez, you don't have to fight Gervonta or Devin Haney if you don't want, because if you fight Devin Haney, then they're going to say, oh, well, you still got to fight Gervonta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're telling this man at age 23 that hasn't really accomplished too much, that he can fight whoever he wants, meaning he could cherry pick for the rest of his career. We already see you as a great fighter.
Well, I understand that, Mr. Dante. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But we have to take a look at Canelo and Teofimo as two separate fighters. Canelo has a proven track record of usually facing the best caliber fighters. And people can bring up Demetrius Bubel Andrade and Jamal Charlo all they want. Those guys, in my opinion, people always bring up these two fighters like they're the be-all, end-all. Jamal Charlo is, shit, you want to talk about an average fighter. Jamal Charlo is an average fighter. I mean, I wouldn't say that he's average, but if you talk about him compared to Canelo, he's nowhere near what Canelo is. Take a look at Jamal Charlo versus Matt Korobov or Austin Trout. He has way too many faults in the style. He just does. And Demetrius Andrade, don't get me wrong, talented, but as talented as what many people try to allege that he is, no.
When they were saying this to Teofimo Lopez, they said it was because he was undisputed. But check this out, though. They also said the same thing to Ryan Garcia, who doesn't even have a belt. Chris Mannix said, right after Ryan Garcia beat Luke Campbell, he said, you call the shots. You can fight whoever you want. Translation, whatever you do, stay away from those very talented, dangerous black fighters. Matter of fact, stay away from...
Well, once again, I understand to a degree what you mean, Mr. Dante, but not every situation is like that. And there's a certain amount of situations to where they are like that. They may avoid certain black fighters, because they may not want the black fighters to potentially be at the top. Are there certain situations like that? Yes, there are. But don't go around trashing certain fighters with a very decent resume like a Tyson Fury or a Canelo Alvarez. People who have fought not only black fighters, but the best pretty much of every demographic out there. And you're still trying to trash them just because you don't want them high on your pound-for-pound list or in the debatable all-time great conversation. So it is what it is.
All of the dangerous fighters so we can continue to promote you to the top. When you truly believe that a fighter is the best, you believe that fighter is the best fighter in the world or one of the best fighters in the world, you do not say he can fight whoever he wants. It's supposed.
Well, you say that with Gervonta Tank Davis and Floyd Mayweather Jr. I remember just like it was yesterday, several years ago. Dante, all in all, was stating that why should Floyd Mayweather Jr. give Manny Pacquiao a shot? You know, he's already had several losses in his career. Once again, Dante, the point that you bring up with that point is not a bad point at all, but you don't keep the same standards. You're still trying to protect Terrence Bud Crawford's resume and Gervonta Tank Davis, even though they barely have decent competition on their resume. Canelo was a fighter that has fought over several A-grade fighters. So he has proven way more than enough, in my view, in his career.
Be the complete contrary. You're supposed to be the main person out there desperately wanting to see the guy who you believe the best go out there and take on all of the biggest challenges. For example, when it comes to Terrence Crawford, you guys always hear me say, I want to see Terrence Crawford fight Errol Spence. Then after the Errol Spence...
Yes, and when he didn't sign with the PBC, we heard nothing but excuses. And when Deontay Wilder did not overall want to face Anthony Joshua, or when he stated that, you know, he did not want to sign the DAZN deal, we heard excuses from you. So just shut up.
I want to see Terrence Crawford move up to 154 and fight Jermell Charlo. You guys have never heard me say, this fighter or that fighter, he can fight whoever he wants while he's in his prime. While there are tons of names, plenty of challenges he has in his weight class or the weight class above. I'll close out with saying this. Now, while Max Golovkin was spot on when he said this, what he said also...
No, he wasn't spot on. He's just saying that because he's salty because his brother, Mr. Gennady Golovkin, that overall, that they blew that fight against Canelo Alvarez in the rematch, and they've been trying to get that trilogy fight ever since, and Canelo wasn't giving it to him. You know, listen, at the end of the day, I like Gennady. He's a decently great fighter. But listen, it was your fault that you blew that rematch to Canelo. Right? It was your fault, nobody else's.
Proves that Triple G is pretty average himself, because Gennady Golovkin, he struggled against this average Mexican boxer twice. I mean, just think about the fact that Floyd Mayweather was an old man that was way smaller than Canelo Alvarez.
People keep acting like Floyd Mayweather Jr. was like in hospice. Floyd Mayweather Jr. was 36 years old. You could debate that he was at the best point in his career because of his offensive and defensive abilities, and he was the clear #1 pound-for-pound fighter. So, come on, man. I mean, don't get me wrong. If Canelo overall was supposed to be as good as him, maybe someone would debate that he should have at least made it a little bit more competitive. But let's cut Canelo at least a little bit of slack. He was 23 years old, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. is an extraordinary talented fighter. And not just extraordinarily talented, he's very intelligent. So I'm willing to cut Canelo at least a little bit of slack there. But no, Canelo is not just an average fighter. And anyone with a brain knows that. I'm pretty sure Dante knows that as well. But he has to push his agenda.
And completely dominated Canelo Alvarez. Now, when you look at the dichotomy, Gennady Golovkin was actually bigger than Canelo Alvarez when they fought against each other, and he still struggled to dominate Canelo.
Well, they were about the same size, in my opinion. But in terms of height and reach, I believe that, yes, Canelo overall was a bit smaller. But Gennady Golovkin, the reason why he struggled was because all around, Canelo's really the more naturally skilled boxer than him. It just is what it is.
Alvarez the way Floyd Mayweather did. Floyd did not have that much power because he already moved up 5 weight classes. He was a smaller guy. Gennady...
Well, Floyd actually, his power did not completely disappear. And that's why he was able to, you know, not only because of the weight drain when it came down to it, but, you know, and the rehydration clause, but also, excuse me, my bad. Also because of, you know, a little bit of Floyd's power, he was able to put Canelo Alvarez back a little bit. But when it came down to it, Floyd was still an extraordinarily skilled boxer when he faced Canelo Alvarez. And he had one of the best performances that I had seen in his career. No doubt about it.
Golovkin, he had the power, he had the size, and he still struggled against Canelo, regardless if we think he won the fight.
Well, hold on a minute here, Mr. Dante. I thought you said that Mr. Gennady Golovkin was old. What happened to Gennady Golovkin being old? Because not only are they alleging that Gennady Golovkin is going to be old in this one, and he is going to be older. He's going to be 40 years old, and clearly not the same fighter. But what happened? When Canelo Alvarez was at the top of the sport, Gennady Golovkin was old. That's the only reason why Canelo Alvarez beat him. Now all of a sudden, he's just an average fighter. Once again, this dude does not believe in so much of his own bullshit. Anyway.
Or not. Can you guys imagine what Floyd Mayweather would have did to Canelo Alvarez if he was Gennady Golovkin's size? You got to remember, when Floyd Mayweather...
Well, we can't really determine it that way, and the reason why that is because some of Mayweather's advantages against Canelo would probably be because of his speed, because he was smaller. So the point that Dante is really bringing up there is an idiotic point, but that doesn't really shock me because he's very dense. It just is what it is. But anyway.
Was a lightweight. He was knocking out almost all of his opponents. And this is the reason.
Yes, and then when he went up in weight overall, when he came a little bit slower and his hand problems overall started to come up, then you started noticing that he overall wasn't knocking out people anymore, even though overall he was somewhat still around their own same size. So just because someone overall is similar in size, when it comes down to it, doesn't always mean that they're still going to have the same abilities. A big part of Mayweather's appeal as a boxer, especially if he's going to face larger opponents, is the fact that he's probably at least a natural 140-pounder. And he's so quick, and he doesn't have that extra weight on, so it is what it is anyway.
Why I always say, if you're going to compare Canelo Alvarez to someone, like Canelo fans, they love to compare Canelo Alvarez to the black fighter that they hate the most, which is Floyd Mayweather, which makes absolutely no sense for many reasons. For one, because before Floyd Mayweather was 23 years old, he had already beat better competition than Canelo has today in his entire career, and Canelo is 32 now. And when I say he beat...
Well, right, but what fighter is Canelo Alvarez really going to beat that you find better to be than someone like a Miguel Cotto at the time or a Manny Pacquiao? There's just not that many fighters around that maybe you can claim that with. Now, some may disagree, but when we take a look at Miguel Cotto and Manny Pacquiao and, Sugar Shane Mosley, those guys, because they were around for the past 20 years, they're going to be looked at as all-time great fighters. Canelo was kind of in the prime of his career. Anyone that he fights right now is not going to have as big of a resume as what probably they did, or at least debatably.
Better competition, we're talking about with no...
Or at least we may not know that until the latter parts of their career.
Controversy. When people talk about Canelo Alvarez having this great resume, they're usually including his defeats. They're talking about...
He only has 2 defeats, Dante. Canelo Alvarez does have a great resume, whether you like to admit it or not.
His fights with Floyd Mayweather, his fights with Golovkin, his fights with Erislandy Lara, or his fight...
Right, but he didn't lose those fights, I hate to tell you. It just is what it is. You can bitch, moan, and complain about that all the living long damn day, but you were not claiming that you thought that Jermell Charlo lost to Brian Castano when he clearly should have. You were not mentioning overall that Andre Ward could have potentially lost to Sergey Kovalev. Now, that was a really close fight. I don't mind it going either way. But let's be real, Mr. Dante. You don't mention it overall when it comes to certain fighters to where you think the fight is really close, or even if you think those fighters do lose, you don't give a shit. But when it comes to a fighter that you have to try and tear down because you know that they're a threat to the #1 pound-for-pound spot, all of a sudden you don't want to count their close fights. No, it doesn't work like that.
With Erislandy Lara. And now
because if we were going to do that, do you know how many fights we would have to throw out the window? We would have to throw out some of Evander Holyfield's fights. We'd have to throw out some of Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s fights. We would have to throw out some of Manny Pacquiao's fights. We would have to throw out some of Marquez's fights and De La Hoya's fights. We'd have to probably throw out some of Muhammad Ali's fights, Sugar Ray Leonard's fights. Like, it just doesn't work that way. The reason overall why we have a victor at the end of the day is to determine who was the better fighter, unless it was a complete robbery. And sometimes that's the case. When we talk about Chavez versus Pernell Whitaker, in my view, that was a clear robbery. There was no way that fight should have been a draw. When we talk about, other fights, maybe all-time great fights that I think maybe could have been a complete robbery, Maybe Leonard versus Hearns too. You know, that probably was a robbery in my opinion. And there might be a few others that I'm not mentioning. Okay, but you know, no, Canelo deserved to win the Gennady Golovkin second fight, the rematch, and you can argue that he deserved to win against Lara.
Fight with Bivol. All of Canelo Alvarez's biggest fights, he either lost or the fight ended in controversy. Which
no, sir, a fighter all in all that ended up losing all his big fights when it comes down to it is someone like an Eric Morales or a Marco Antonio Barrera, if we're going to talk about other Mexican fighters, or an Oscar De La Hoya. No, that's not fair to say about Canelo Alvarez. Now, you can mention that point all you want to about, oh, well, it ended up in controversy. But once again, do you know how many fights that we would then have to detract? We would have to say that Felix Tito Trinidad did not really get the official win against Oscar De La Hoya, so we can't count that anymore. You know, we can no longer count, you know, Evander Holyfield possibly against Riddick Bowe. We can't count that anymore. You know, we can't count Andre Ward's win over Sergey Kovalev. We can't count that because that is allegedly controversial. We can't count Sugar Ray Leonard's win overall over Marvin Hagler because so many people count that as controversial. Or Manny Pacquiao over Marquez or all this other bullshit. Like, we can't do that unless we know for a fact that there's no way in hell that that fighter should have won. Like a Timothy Bradley versus Manny Pacquiao. Or, you know, once again, a Chavez versus a Whitaker. You know, something like that.
Means many people thought that Canelo Alvarez actually lost some of the fights.
So that must mean that Jermell Charlo, that he really overall should not be in the top 5 pound for pound, Dante, because, yeah, he won the rematch against Castano, but the first one was very controversial, and he did not even beat Tony Harrison the first time around. So Dante does not really follow a lot of his own quote-unquote rules when it comes down to it. He's just doing this because he does not like Canelo.
It shows up on his record as a win. So anyway, getting back to my original point. If you're going to compare Canelo Alvarez to anyone, you should be comparing him to Gennady Golovkin. Because there are no two fighters that have...
No, Gennady Golovkin, in my view, even though he's a great fighter, Canelo Alvarez is above. In my opinion, if you're going to compare Canelo Alvarez, the fighters that you compare him to at the moment would probably be someone like a Bernard Hopkins, a Joe Calzaghe, an Andre Ward, somewhere on that level. Maybe a Tommy Hearns, even though I think he's been a little bit overrated throughout the years. Those are the fighters that you compare him to.
More in common than those two fighters. Both of these fighters avoided the most dangerous...
And this is another level that actually is very great. Oscar De La Hoya, Miguel Cotto, and Sugar Shane Mosley. Those are all fighters, in my view, that are on a very similar level. And guess what? Those are fighters that lost more big fights in their career than what Canelo Alvarez did. So Canelo Alvarez is in very good company.
Black fighters like Charlo and Andrade, they were both protected by old media and promoted to the top. The truth is, if Gennady...
Well, yes, they were somewhat promoted to the top, but they also were able to get there with a certain amount of results. And Dante, I know you're not going to like this, but neither Andrade nor Charlo were ever on the level of those two fighters. Never.
Golovkin had never been protected from Andre Ward. And Canelo Alvarez had never been protected from Andrade and Charlo, or the Charlo brothers. I'm talking about going all the way back 6-7 years ago when Canelo was at 154. And the Charlo brothers and Andrade were the champions calling him out. If Golovkin and Canelo would have took those...
Yes, you allegedly want to see that Charlo fight so bad, but when Canelo was allegedly interested in Charlo earlier on in the year, you said, oh no, I don't want to see that fight anymore. Charlo's not the same. Even though, what age is he? 29 to 31? So quit your bullshitting, Dante.
Old media would have never gotten an opportunity to promote these guys to the top, which is why old media did their best to protect these fighters from those guys. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys. If you look...
But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that that'd be very particularly interesting, but it is going to be very interesting to see where overall Canelo goes from here. But anyways, that's really about it. Thank you guys so much for watching.